ಚೆಕ್. ಹಲೋ. ಬಂದೈತ ನೋಡು. ಚೆಕ್ ಚೆಕ್. ಬರುತ್ತೀವ.
Hello. Yeah. A very good evening to one and all. I, Samarth Kulkarni from Batch 28, welcome you all for the annual budget discussion of 2023. India has emerged as a bright spot amidst rising inflation, Russia Ukraine war, and COVID resurgence. But how will it navigate through all of these challenges in the first budget of Amrit Kal? Let's see. I welcome all of our esteemed guests, Zyme dignitaries, faculties, and all the students for joining us today. The event is organized every year by Finitiative, the Finance Club of Zyme Bangalore. The release of Union Budget is the most significant economic event of the year, and it is only fair and appropriate to learn it from the experts in the field. We take immense pride in announcing the panel for our post budget analysis, and we thank each one of them for joining us today. First on the panel, we have Assistant Professor Dr. Ziko Das Gupta, who teaches at Azim Premji University. He completed his graduation from Jawaharlal Nehru University in New Delhi with PhD in economics. His work has appeared in numerous journals, including PSL Quarterly, Review of Keynesian Economics, Structural Change and Economic Dynamics, and many more. His work focuses on questions of distribution and growth, macroeconomic policies, financial system, and money and banking. Several of his ongoing studies and projects cover issues like fiscal policy guidelines and Indian economy's financial positions. Our next guest is CA Sanjay Singhal, who carries tremendous experience in financial and legal worlds. He carries immense knowledge in the field of real estate, banking, retail, supply chain management across various industries. He has worked with huge financial institutions like ICICI, Kotak Securities, Olam Exports, and many more. We look forward to hearing your insights, sir. And our third guest in the panel is Mr. Praveen B., who is director at, Sun, uh, at Suntech Pro Engineering and Honorable General Secretary at Karnataka Small Scale Industry Association. He has 7 years of corporate experience and has over 13 years of experience in the field of entrepreneurship. Thank you so much, sir, for joining us today. Along with them, also on the panel, we have student coordinators Priyam Banerjee from Batch 28 and Sharon Anusha from Batch 27. Now, I would like to invite Chairman Zaim Kochi, Ambassador CP Ravindranathan sir, to moderate the session further.
Thank you, Samat Kulkarni. Um, distinguished panelists of this evening, Dr. Ziko Dasgupta, Mr. Sanjay Singhal, Shri Praveen, Director, my dear colleagues of the faculty, and dear students, led by the student moderators on the dais. Welcome to this annual feature of XIME, the discussion of the country's budget. We have with us the presence of some very seasoned observers from the academics and from the corporate and financial scene, together assuring us of a lively and productive session on the budget. Now, in the last 1 week since the budget was introduced, we have, and preceded by the economic survey, we have had a whole lot of coverage of the subject on the media, including the television, and so much has been written that as moderator of this session, I can hardly find anything new to say on the subject. But of course, I do expect that from the members of the panel who will treat the principal aspects of the budget very knowledgeably. I'm confident. I'm confident of that. But I thought, all the same, as part of my remarks as the chairperson of this session, I will strike some high spots. This budget comes after India has staged a recovery, nearly a recovery, to the period which prevailed before the onset of the pandemic. Some of us might recall what the Chinese, in a moment of hubris, said about India during that grimmest period of the COVID interlude. They said, and this was in May, I remember it distinctly, as a retired diplomat, but with sensitivity still about national pride. I remember the Chinese, in a moment of hubris, as I said earlier, said that there was a contrast between the funeral pyres of the unnamed ones on the banks of the Ganges in India with the enthusiastic fireworks at the same time with the Chinese celebrated their mission to the Mars. But today, 2 years on, we are out of COVID. But China, unhappily for all of us, because human calamities or predicaments are not to be laughed at. They are to be sympathized with. Today, China is having more problems with the COVID than we have. Thereby, what does that show? That show not necessarily, not that we are smarter or cleverer or anything of the kind. What that shows, in my humble opinion, is that the Indian style of muddling through, in the end, has a lot of wisdom to it. And we do prevail at the end of all our muddling. Something along these lines we can say about our economy as well. The fact that we have now resumed our economic growth, we can be sure, will help us achieve the same growth targets with which we were familiar some years ago. Now, but what is important in analyzing facts like this about the economic programs aimed at, or economic policies aimed at employment generation, economic growth, increase of GDP, is that we should cut out the noise. We should know how to separate the corn from the chaff. I say this because today even our discussions of economics are mixed up so much with politics in our country. For example, there is a kind of periodization which people adopt while discussing the country's economic progress. That is, what happened before 2014, contrasting it against what happened after 2014, or what happened under the UPA versus what is happening to the economy under BJP. This is what I meant, the noise. Economic growth is a continuous process. What happens now would not have happened if things had not happened in the first decades of the 21st century, and so on and so forth. So whatever is happening now in the context of the budget should be regarded as a part of a continuum. Now, when you look at matters from that perspective, you realize one or two very important truths about the way Indian economy is moving forward. Now, people, particularly the spokesmen of the ruling party and the government, have a tendency to compare the situation now with compare the situation of today with rising economic growth, rates of growth, with what happened before 2000, before the onset of the pandemic, that is in 2020. But the right way of comparing, the period now and the period which lies ahead in the context of these budget projections, what we should do now is to compare these last few years with what had happened in the second decade of the 21st century. Now, in the second decade of the 21st century, from 2011 to 2019, India had witnessed a drop in economic growth from what it was from 2000 to 2010. So if you look at the figures, you will find that from the years 2000 to 2010, the economy had grown at the rate of 7 to 8%. But from 2011 to 2020, it had dropped to 5 to 6%. And COVID, of course, aggravated it. Now it is from that level that we should rise. And the question we have to ask of this budget is how far it would help us to raise us from not from the present level of economic growth, but from the diminished level of economic growth from 2011 to 2020 as against the higher economic growth rate from 2000 to 2010. Now, if the question is posed along these lines, I would say that this is a very good budget because it is a budget which aims quite effectively, in my opinion, at economic growth and employment generation on a very effective footing. How does it do it? I will be very brief because you will be hearing more in detail on this from the distinguished speakers here. The prime aspect of the budget is the enormous provision it has made for public capital investment, which this year represents a 33% increase from last year. And last year there was an increase of 25% from the year previous. No budget till now has given such pride of place to capital, capex, capital expenditure by the government. And that's going to make a lot of difference because it is going to have what we call in economics the multiplier effect. Not only all the areas of industry and services where this investment will take place, but it will embrace the private sector. It will embrace all the sectors, subsectors of the economy in what is termed as the multiplier effect. So the government should really be complimented in this enormous provision made for public capital expenditure. Obviously, the government's strategic vision lays emphasis on investment, that such public investment as the budget has provided will give rise to a heightened rate of economic growth. But in the process, of course, you have to balance the budget as well. So the second strong point which I see in this budget is that this enormous provision for capital investment, which would have the effect of increasing the budget deficit, has been balanced by a prudent fiscal management policy. Indeed, the government's objective is to bring down the fiscal deficit itself from 5.9, which it is now, to 4.5 by 2025. So the budget attempts this very laudable kind of balance, increased thrust on growth, along with a conscious policy of reducing the budgetary deficit, thereby making Indian economy rank well enough in the global reckoning according to the parameters which rating agencies and others have when they evaluate a country's economic performance. But in the process of making this balance, and in the process of setting apart so much for capital expenditure, the government has had to do some trade-offs. Some of those trade-offs, unfortunate in my opinion. For example, the social sector broadly has suffered under this budget. There are the allocation given by education, maybe it represents 8% more than last year, but we certainly should spend more on education. There's absolutely no doubt about it, especially in the light of the implementation of the new economic policy involving training of teachers, more schools, and upgradation of standards and so on. We would need to spend much more on education than the 8% rise given in the budget. And public health, again, the increase in allocation is only about 4%, 3 point some percentage. Again, that's not good enough. Social sector, there are so many heads and subheads where allocations are either the same, or there's a moderate increase, or in some cases, pared down. The Mahatma Gandhi Rural Employment Guarantee Scheme has suffered a cut. So also for subsidies. So also schemes relating to Anganwadi and nutritional schemes, for which happen to cover some of the most disadvantaged sections of the Indian population. So these are things which perhaps for reasons the government could not do much about, have been neglected, and that will have an impact. Because let us not forget the fact that we may be the 5th largest economy in the world, maybe a $5 trillion economy soon and all that, but we are also one of the poorest countries in the world. The poor in India has been estimated now as 16%. And those who can be exposed to the prospect of multidimensional poverty are another 19%. So how will these people benefit from the budget? They will benefit from the budget only from what is provided under the social sector expenses. And there, to the extent that we are not provided as much as we should, the budget does suffer a handicap. So these are some of the high spots, as I said, which I thought I would evoke in the course of my my remarks as moderator. Now, with that having said, let me leave the stage to the distinguished members of the panel, and we can certainly be assured that we will have a very productive session this evening. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, sir. That was really informative and informational for us. I would like to invite first guest on the panel, Dr. Zico Das Gupta, to give us information and his insights.
Can you just maximize it? First of all, thanks a lot to the Finance Club of Zyme. Thanks to the organizers, and thanks everyone for having me here. It's a great privilege to be here and talking about the budget. What I would like to do perhaps is to continue with the thread of discussion that has been talked about by the moderator, and it seems to be a good starting point to initiate the debate or discussion on the budget. What I would like to do is to present or share some thoughts about the macroeconomic framework, the macroeconomic implications, and some macroeconomic constraints which perhaps informs this union budget. First of all, to start with the specific juncture of the Indian economy. Now, we are we are talking about a budget at a very critical juncture of the Indian economy in specific respects. First of all, we are talking about a specific juncture where the global demand is weak, and it has important implications. If you think about what would be the difference between the decade of 2000s and the decade of 2010s, one of the major difference would be the kind of global demand that the Indian economy registered, particularly before the global financial crisis, but also to some extent in the brief interval between 2009-10 and 10-11, where due to coordinated fiscal stimulus packages all over the world, and the export growth rate and global demand was extremely buoyant during that period. Comes 2010s, the global demand on average remained weak as compared to decade of 2000s, but yet there were specific years like 14-15 or 15-16 when the oil prices were low, which provided some stimulus again to the external sector. In other words, during the decade of 2000s, during specific episodes of 2010s, there were favorable external market conditions which pushed up exports, which pushed up demand, which pushed up private investments. 2017-18 onwards, particularly from the fourth quarter of 2017-18, it was a changed world. The global demand was weak. Indian economy entered into a prolonged episode of economic slowdown, which happened to be the most prolonged episode of slowdown in liberalization period. In the last, from 90s onwards, if one calculates quarterly growth rates, the number of quarters for which the growth has slowed down from 2017-18 quarter 4 onwards, that episode would be longest if one estimates the period between 2017-18 and just the period till 2020 March. In other words, even before the Indian economy entered into the COVID zone, the Indian economy was already registering some slowdown in the growth rate because of export slowdowns, because of slowdown in global demand. What we are witnessing right now in the post-COVID period is a further shock. First of all, global prices have gone up, oil prices, food prices, and that has been associated with sharp increase in the interest rates everywhere, particularly by the Fed, and that has been associated with different rise in the interest rates, be it by the RBI or different kinds of central banks have also increased the interest rates. And that has pushed down the global demand drastically. In fact, in the last quarter, the volume-wise merchandise growth rate had been in the negative. Now, in this context, this budget was placed. And it had primarily two challenges. First of all, to push up growth, not only vis-a-vis the shock which it registered during COVID, but even the structural constraints which the Indian economy confronted just before COVID. That is from 2017 to 2020 March. The second challenge was not only concerned with the output question, but also the employment question. Remember, during the decade of 2000, when India was having a very good time as far as output growth was concerned, the employment growth rate did not improve much, particularly in the formal non-agricultural sector. And this is also termed as the problem of jobless growth or low employment elasticity. The second challenge would be also to increase the employment of the economy. Now, given the context, given the challenge, the question is how would the budget would be able to do that? Now, before coming to the budget, let me just take a few moments to think about the macroeconomic policy framework under which the Indian economy operates. Typically, India's macroeconomic policy is guided by what is termed as the new consensus framework. The characteristic feature of new consensus framework is RBI policy rates or interest rates are used to stabilize inflation rate and output gap, whereas fiscal policy typically abides by fiscal rule, which is termed as the FRBM Act. Now, let us call the first target of fiscal policy as target 1, which is to abide by the fiscal deficit target. So that is a specific fiscal deficit GDP ratio given by the FRBM Act, which budget would try to meet. Of course, with some escape clauses, but nonetheless, the objective would be to meet that deficit target or debt ratio. Now, the second objective is, of course, what we were talking about is to stimulate growth. So higher expenditures, higher multiplier, higher growth stimulating impact, higher would be the output growth rate. Let us call this target 2. But note that the fiscal deficit that is consistent with the FRBM Act may not be consistent with the fiscal deficit that is required to stimulate growth. These are two analytically distinct targets that we are talking about. One of the central rule of macroeconomic policy making is called the Tinbergen rule. It states that the effectiveness of any policy is that the number of policy instruments should be as large, at least as large as the number of policy targets. Note, we have two targets over here. The target of meeting fiscal deficit, the target of stimulating growth. But there exists only one policy instrument to achieve that, which is fiscal deficit GDP ratio. In other words, there exists one instrument, but multiple policy targets, which may not be consistent with each other. In this backdrop, in this broad constraint, the budget was placed. And this is what we would like to understand, that how the budget negotiated with this macroeconomic policy constraints and the objectives. So broadly, this budget had two targets. The target one was to reduce fiscal deficit ratio to meet the fiscal deficit target. FRBM Act, by 2025, it is supposed to reduce deficit from the given level. And the second, it also had the challenge of stimulating growth. The manner in which it tried to do that, as has been already pointed out, by increasing the capital expenditures, changing the composition of expenditures in favor of capital expenditures, but reducing the revenue expenditures. The central assumption that both these objectives would be fulfilled, that is the objective of reducing deficit as well as stimulating the economy, is based on the following assumption, that the multiplier effect or the stimulating effect of capital expenditures has to be greater than the multiplier effect of the revenue expenditures. That's the only way in which changing the expenditure composition can stimulate growth, while reducing the overall expenditures or deficit can meet the deficit target. So that was the fundamental objective of designing the budget in a specific manner. Let us think about how the government tried to achieve both these targets. Note that fiscal deficits can be reduced in two ways, either by increasing the revenue receipts or by reducing the expenditure GDP ratio. The manner in which the deficit ratio is supposed to be reduced in this budget is primarily through reduction in the expenditure GDP ratio. As compared to this year, the following year is supposed to have more or less same amount of revenue receipt GDP ratio, which means if the deficit GDP ratio has to be reduced, it has to be reduced at the cost of overall expenditure GDP ratio, which is precisely what we witness in this budget, that next year the expenditure GDP ratio is supposed to be lower as compared to this year. However, the composition has changed, as we were talking about. Capital expenditure GDP ratio is supposed to increase, but revenue expenditure GDP ratio is supposed to fall. And that's the change in the expenditure composition. Now, the question is, there are two questions at hand. First, why is it the case that the revenue receipt does not increase from the given period? That's one set of questions. And second, if the expenditure has fallen, what are the components in which expenditure is supposed to fall? Now, as far as the revenues are concerned, you would see that broadly it is the direct tax GDP ratio, which is supposed to remain more or less unchanged in the next year as compared to this year, be it the income tax or the corporate tax. Despite concessions in income tax slabs to a certain extent, you would see that the government believes that the income tax GDP ratio in the next year is going to be more or less same as compared to this year. Corporate tax GDP ratio, again, the same. Rather, most of the tax mobilization is supposed to be in the form of GST. In other words, the composition of taxes is supposed to be in favor of the indirect taxes, where the share of direct taxes is supposed to fall. As far as the expenditures are concerned, the expenditure cutback has been primarily in the field of development expenditures as a whole. Some fall in the rural expenditures. Note the severe cut in the National Rural Employment Guarantee Act, that would be included in that the broad category of rural development. and some social sector expenditures, more or less starting from a low base, is supposed to remain at that low level. So that is broadly the budget. It's all about that reduction in deficits, changing the expenditure composition, maintaining more or less the same kind of revenue receipts, with direct taxes remaining more or less same, but mobilizing some taxes through the indirect taxes. Now, at this point, there will be two specific concerns, perhaps, which emerge from this entire framework. First, that note that this budget would have two opposite impact on growth. Higher capital expenditures is going to push up growth, whereas reduction in the revenue expenditures or current expenditures is going to reduce growth for the very same reasons. Like, so you have different kinds of multiplier effects. What is going to be the net impact on growth? It depends on different factors, not only the multiplier values, but also the weightage of different kinds of expenditures in GDP. But there is a further concern as well, that even if the expenditure composition change is able to push up growth to some extent as compared to previous year, note that we are talking about a very critical juncture where there are exogenous shocks at hand. There is very weak global demand, there is an impact of high interest rates, there is an impact of high prices. So the stimulus that we are talking about has to be sufficient not only to compensate for the adverse impact of revenue expenditures, but also it has to compensate the adverse impact of other exogenous shocks as well. To what extent it will do that, needs to be seen, but at least what the economic survey suspects, that there would be some growth reduction in the next year, going from 6.9 to 6.5%. So that's concern one, that to what extent the stimulus is sufficient enough to stimulate growth. The second is, of course, going back to the divergence between growth and employment. What this graph tells you is the decadal average values of output growth rate and employment growth rate. To put it shortly, what this graph shows, that as compared to 80s and 90s, the average value of GDP growth rate during 2000s and 2010s has been higher. Yet, the average decadal value of employment growth rate in 2000s and 2010s is not higher as compared to 80s and 90s. Right? So that's the essence of the delinking between output growth rate and employment growth rate. I'm not going into the details of that. This is a scatter plot. The blue line tells you the responsiveness of employment growth rate to output growth rate. The horizontal scatter plot tells you that there is absolutely zero responsiveness of employment growth rate to changes in output growth rate in different sectors in the last 30 or 40 years or so. What does it mean in a nutshell? That this budget is essentially about meeting deficit target while changing expenditure composition in favor of capital expenditure. The strategy in itself may provide additional stimulus for growth because the multiplier value of capital expenditure is greater than revenue expenditures. But nonetheless, it may not be enough to resist a fall in growth because of the critical juncture that we were talking about. Now, increasing employment does not appear as a distinct target. There has been reduction in the allocation of employment generation, which poses a concern to what extent economic recovery would be associated with the recovery in employment. And finally, the last question comes as far as the macroeconomic policy framework is concerned. There is one approach which one can think about, that given macroeconomic policy framework, the government is doing the best that it can. The other way to think about the same budget is that whether the macroeconomic policy framework itself is sufficient or suitable enough to meet the double challenges that the Indian economy confronts right now, of economic recovery in the midst of exogenous shocks and economic recovery along with employment generation. I'll stop here. Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much. We have had a very able presentation. We are now, I'm afraid, running a bit behind schedule, mostly because of my having exceeded the time allotted to me. So I would request the speakers who follow to do their best to enable us to stick to the All right. You mean the students or Mr. Praveen? Yes. So we have a suggestion here. We will now move straight to the presentation by Mr. Praveen, and after that there will be the discussion led by the student moderators.
Yep, the slide change. Can I go on this? Which is the forward moment? Forward. Yeah, good evening, everyone. Good evening, my dear students and all the dignitaries on the dais. Of course, the last complete week has been a week full of, data analytics, big data, and, which is running around in the country as such. And even you should be aware that Karnataka government also is having its state budget on 17th of February. So I would like to just give you a background on this budget. Budget is basically, it is not an actual, it is a proposal. It is an estimate how the country is going to expend, how the country is going to get the revenues, and how the country is going to grow. So recently we had this budget by Nirmala Sitaramji, and it is the last full-fledged budget which was presented. And the background is there are 9 states which are coming in for elections, which is nearly 30% of the country's states are going in for elections. So keeping that as one of the aspect, first and foremost, I would like to make my point that it is a budget for the middle class. You should know these are some of the facts and figures before you get into the nitty-gritties of the budgets. This is where India stands today. Even though we have a per capita income of 1,97,000 per head today, and compared to America, if it is 52 lakhs, we are still G20 leaders. India ranks somewhere about 63rd position out of the 190 countries in ease of doing business. This year's budget size was 43.3 lakhs crores versus the previous 39.7. There is an increase in the borrowing, which is 15.6 lakhs crores. The budget generally gets allocated across sectors. In India today, there are about 102 sectors. And this 102 sectors allocation do happen. And as GDP is somewhere around 6.6 and expected to reach about 7, with an inflation of 5.3, expected to reduce to 4.2 by 2025. And you should know that there are only 6.5 crore taxpayers in this country, 6.5 crores. Of this, 53 lakhs are MSME business owners paying taxes. If you look at it, the major of the expenses towards this budget is garnered from borrowings, which is still a liability for the country. And second, the biggest is through the taxes. If you look at the sector-wise allocation, major again goes to the borrowings, interest, which is at 24%, which is still a little alarming for us. As I was rightly telling, we still look at the poor economy aspects. I represent MSME, so I was a little unhappy because we just have 1.1% of the allocation. Any product requires a branding. And this year, our finance minister came out with this concept of Amrit Kal. So just to keep you all informed, Amrit Kal is something which India wants to project towards 2047, the next 25 years of growth pattern. They termed it as Amrit Kal. Under that, we have Atmanirbhar. Atmanirbhar is something which is for a self-reliant economy. There were 7 priority sectors which they were focused. And I guess this is something unique. Few of the things which has come out in this budget, especially the green growth, which has attracted something close to 85,000 crores. And youth power, which is roughly pulled in about 47,000 crores, especially the startups. And we also mentioned about the reach, the last mile reach, both in the social sector as well as other business sector. We also spoke about the ease of doing business, where nearly 38,000 compliances were reduced. And still we have a lot of other compliances too. And 4,300 legal compliances were decriminalized. So country is looking at simplifying things, simplifying transactions in this country. This is roughly the budget profile. It is a 45.03 lakh crore budget. How the rupee comes from? Again, it is a borrowing. If you split 1 rupee as your budget, 34% is from the borrowings, and GST contributes about 17%. I was just doing my calculations. Roughly, India's revenue is 57% from taxes. And we pay highest expenditure towards the interest. See, there was a strong statement made by the finance minister in the country. Again, as a management lesson, if you want to make your statement strong, you should do your homework. Amrit Kal, over the next 25 years, India leading towards the 100th year. What is it all about? Roughly about 102 sectors, sector-wise split. They are focused more this time on the urban infrastructure. So the whole idea is to attract the foreign investments. India is going towards the 5 trillion US economy. If you want to speed up on this, the only best way they have thought is to attract the foreign investment. Roughly 13.7 lakh crores are called in for infrastructure. As usual, defense calls for 5.94, but what is quite interesting is the green growth, which has pulled in 85,000 crores. That's where the opportunity for a lot of businesses comes. This is one of the new initiatives. They've also called in for a new concept called Biodhan, which is a 10,000 crore, which is from the renewable biogas production. And also they're looking at alternate fuels and renewable energy, which is again called in for roughly 47,000 crores. So these are the sectors which youngsters like you should be looking at associating in your future. So these are some of the Saptarishis, what I meant to say previous slide. There is a new concept which is rolled out in this world for the first time called Sri Anna. Sri Anna is something where you're connecting the last mile from local to global. There is some on the food production aspect, global millets. India is the first, biggest, largest producer of millets in the world, but second biggest exporter. So they have made a strategy to make this available to the last mile. There is a 2,300 crores spent on this. And there is an international skill development center, which is coming up in 30 centers and aims at employing 47 lakh international skilled youths, especially people here from MBA HR. It's a huge opportunity for you there. These are some of the bold declarations which the budget has come out with. 500 waste to wealth Govardhan. And recently in 2022, there was a policy called National Logistics Policy. If you want to achieve this 5 trillion US economy, you need to be fast. You need to integrate the 8 different transport modes. So this National Logistics Policy is being taken up aggressively. The whole idea of this, there is about 75,000 crores given to the transport. The whole idea of this national policy, logistics policy, is to reduce the logistics cost from 13 to 16%, which is currently on, to 6 to 8%. Look at the input cost reduction. That's the plan. That's where we are getting into 50 regional airports and 400 Vande Bharat speed trains. So these are some of the highlights. looking at the last mile connectivity, which was a new concept which has been introduced this time, irrigation sector, especially Lucky Karnataka, has pulled in 5,300 crores, which intends to connect 770 villages with drinking water, Jal Jeevan scheme. There is about this PVTG scheme, particularly vulnerable tribal groups, which may give employment to 38,800 teachers and setting up somewhere close to 740 training centers rural. And the first and the foremost, for a country to reach the global level, we need to have a global access. They came out with a concept called one district, one product. Karnataka currently has got 32 districts with 28 marked products brand. Example, a product in Mysore silk sari, it gets GI marked and it gets sold globally. If something, it's not a make in India anymore, it is make in Mysore. So look at this concept. ODOP is opening up to the world from local to global because 12% of the MSMEs are roughly 6.3 crore in this country, and 12% of this do a turnover less than 40 lakhs. And an MSME which does a turnover less than 50 crores is 98%. So our Indian economy, MSME economy, is a micro and a small economy. So all the budget analysis has to be done keeping micro and small perspective. So students, you have a lot of opportunity, especially the rural part of India, where 55% of the wealth lies, the resources lies, and the economy lies. Please tap the resources. Under the ODOP scheme, there's a concept called Unity Mall, which they want to connect to the globe. Even I am also eager to know about it. That's a future market. And from the perspective of MSME, I represent MSME Karnataka. I'm the secretary of KASIA, Karnataka Small Scale Industry Association. We roughly have about 30,000 members who are direct industrialists. It was a little heartburn for us to go through this budget because we expected the raising interest cost, which is currently about 12 to 13% working capital loan cost, at least a reduction of 2 to 3%, which didn't happen. Today, to be very, very competitive, we need to have the input cost. And finance cost is today quite high. And there was something aggressively planned called as an ECLGS scheme, Emergency Credit Link Guarantee Scheme, which we expected to extend till 2024, which didn't come our way. MSMEs contribute roughly about 30% of our GDP, 48% of the total country's export, and about 40% of the manufacturing output. We employ as a sector something close to 18 crore people in this country. So we really expected something good, but didn't come our way. But in consolation, there is something called a credit guarantee CGT MSC scheme, especially this people who would like to start a new business without collateral. The country has got this aggressive, well-placed plan scheme of central government called CGT MSC scheme. There is an outlay given up to 9,000 crores. So anyone would like to start a business without collateral, please approach on the CGT MSC. The ticket size they have given is 9,000 crore. Our expectation was 20,000 crores. The reason being, India is the world's best #1 startup. And Karnataka has got more than 400 of the top 500 Fortune companies positioned in this country. And the top 168 R&D labs of the world are present in India. So we expected a lot, especially for the startups, but it didn't happen. But anyways, I see again a constellation called a RAMP plan, which is about 1,170. What I suggest is, please make a note, msme.gov.in. You please go through this website because time is of essence now. There are some good packages announced, especially for the startups and young budding entrepreneurs. Please do encash on this opportunity. Vishwakarma Kaushalya Samman is a scheme for micro, tiny and nano entrepreneurs. So that's where again your potential lies. Look at entrepreneurship as one of the future for you. this budget looks very friendly. Some of the consolations, it's not so important for me to mention, but still looking at the EODB parameters, ease of doing business parameters, PAN is going to be one reference business point henceforth, so thank you. And we had nearly about 38,000 compliances, which is slightly reduced. Thank you again. And business looks, they're coming out of the concept called DigiLocker, which is already there. DigiLocker is present, but it is not effective. So they are looking at doing a DigiLocker as one of the KYC point of contact for all your statutory requirements. That actually reduces your burden. And there were about close to 39,000 crores MSME fund, which is struck up in bid, which is stuck up in government, which is stuck up in government corporations. When they are tendered, that is getting released. So it's a good relief for MSME from that perspective. And we see a customs import reduction, which will reduce our raw material input cost. 17% of our operation cost is raw material. So we are eagerly looking at a customs duty reduction on that. Telecom is one more segment, especially in the 5G. They're coming up with 100 labs. There's a huge opportunity for youth. And overall, I would say it's a marginally positive budget, especially for the MSMEs. If you look at the micro level, I'll share the slide so you can have it in detail later. This is some of the schemes, direct and indirect schemes, which is being precisely allocated to the MSME sector. Roughly about 21,442 crores is allocation to MSME sectors. These are some of the new initiatives. And one good thing about the middle class economy, as I rightly targeted, it is the exemption limit for the rebate is extended to 7 lakhs. Earlier it was 5 lakhs. That's a good relief, keeping budget perspective, keeping the election point of view. Tax slabs earlier was 6, now it is reduced to 5. Standard deduction 15.5 lakhs. Now we will have to pay somewhere around 52,500. That's again a good move. Professionals, earlier we were having something like, on a tax audit, compulsory tax audit up to a turnover of 2 crores. Now it is up to 3 crores. So thank you with that. Sectoral impact, if you ask me about the MSME sector, overall it is marginally positive. And I give a rating of around 6 in a scale of 10. So this is the center, one of the centers which we are coming up in Karnataka through CASIA. And we have put up the papers to be the first international skill center, CASIA Skill Center. There's a budget allotted to us for 10 crores. So thank you. Thank you so much.
Well, Mr. B. Praveen did well by illuminating some noteworthy aspects of the budget. Now, I call upon Mr. Sanjay Singhal to give us his perspectives on the budget.
Yeah, good evening, friends. I would just like to sum some of what my colleagues have discussed here. So this budget is mainly about how to tame the inflation and how to boost the infrastructure and giving more money to the common man so that he spends more wisely. And if you see the budget as such from the finance perspective, you can see that there is a rationalization of personal income tax rates, and the investment for senior citizens have gone up in various schemes like the senior citizen savings schemes and the post office monthly income scheme and Prime Minister Awas Yojana. So the senior citizens can get easily about 5 to 6 lakhs per annum just by parking the money in the various government schemes. That is how the government is planning to accumulate the money and put it in the various infrastructure development projects. And if you see the reason for slowdown of the economy between 2010 to 2019, we saw that there was a demonetization and implementation of GST, which has set the ground for the next couple of years. So in the last 1 year, you would have seen the direct taxes base has gone up by almost 33%. And the GST members have gone up to 1.5 crores. and the collection of GST has gone up close to 1.5 lakh crore per month now. So the tone is set. The objective is to increase the tax base both for direct taxpayers and indirect taxpayers. The basic customs duty, which was about 21%, is reduced to 13%, which will reduce the raw material cost, which will boost the growth in the manufacturing sector as such. And the CGTMSE scheme, where the insurance premium was about 2.74%, has been reduced to 1%, which will reduce the effective cost of borrowings for the MSME as such. So what my friend told that he was expecting some reduction in the rate of interest, but definitely this is going to have an impact on that. And if you see the inflation compared to our neighboring countries and across the globe, we have managed it better, and our rates are comparatively better, I say, when compared to other developed countries. That's it. Thank you.
Now it is the turn of our student moderators to take up the deliberation this evening and take them forward.
Hello.
So my question, sir, is for Dr. Ziko Das Gupta. Sir, so you did mention that the multiplier effect from capital expenditure, which could be felt, is going to be balanced by the reduction in revenue expenditure. Do you think there is any way, and you felt that it would not stimulate growth? What do you think would actually, what components of the budget is there which would actually stimulate growth?
Yeah, thanks for the question. No, my proposition is not that capital expenditure will not stimulate growth. My argument is the following, that just like higher capital expenditure pushes up growth, lower revenue expenditures pushes down growth. So there are two opposite effects we are talking about. It's the overall impact on budget depends on the relative strength of these two forces. Capital expenditure multiplier value is much higher than the multiplier value of the revenue expenditures. So given the kind of expenditure ratios that we have right now, I would say that there can be about 0.5 percentage point stimulus of growth provided by the budget itself on the expenditure composition thing. But here comes the second point, that we are not talking about a normal budget right now. We are talking about a specific juncture where interest rates have gone up, prices have gone up, weak global demand. So there are other factors that are pulling down the growth. So this net effect of 0.5 percentage point stimulus needs to compensate all those negative factors as well, which may not be the case. And that is perhaps what the economic survey has in mind when it says that the median expected growth rate in the next year would be something around 6.5.
Okay, thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Good evening, panelists. My question is for Shri Praveen, sir. Sir, through the Shri Anna initiative, the Indian government has basically said that it wants to be a global hub for superfoods, right? And millets is a very good example for that. So how long do you think this will take? How long do you think achieving this goal will take for the country?
As I clearly said, we are the largest producer of millets in the country. See what happens, you may keep on producing at one particular length and breadth, but you should know how to market. If you don't know where's your markets and you don't know how to sell. So that's the reason why there is a plan which is coming up and which is back of the mind is a PM. It is called ONDC. Just please make a note. This is some things which will come in the future. ONDC, Open Network Digital Commerce. This is the new buzzword in the country. And through this ONDC, products like millets can reach the global hub. Today, you are all exposed to Amazon, Snapdeal, Flipkarts of the world. But tomorrow, you should be seeing Bharat.com, which could be a part of an ONDC. you could see Bangalore.com, which could be a market for Bangalore itself. Somewhere in the last mile rural part of Karnataka, if someone is strongly branding his millets and he doesn't know where to sell because he doesn't know his markets, it is restricted. This is the platform they are strategically planning. And that's the reason country is very aggressive. It is on a fast mode. It is towards the 5 trillion economy with strategies and technologies. So another 2 years, India should be number one, not only producer, but exporter of millets. Siridhanya is something what we call, right? Siridhanya. There are about 19 types of Siridhanyas presently in the country. So 2025, mark my words, it will be on the ONDC. Your Amazons will be almost on the verge of closures. At least they will be selling only selective products. They will be curtailed. They will be forced to collaborate with ONDC network. The bigger guns will be forced on the ONDC network. That's the way India is going forward. So from local to global.
Thank you, sir. So now I have a question for CA Sanjay, sir. Sir, it can be argued, sir, that this new tax regime which has come to place is actually not promoting a sense of the saving mentality which was there with the previous tax regime. So we're not given any exemptions in terms of Chapter 6A deductions, and it does not promote a savings mentality. And I think this is something which is of special concern to our second year students who are 80% placed and who have job offers now. So what would you suggest, sir, the old tax regime or the new tax regime, especially for new fresh workers like us?
How many people are here into savings now? Especially the youth population. So if you see the savings instrument, it is all about PF, FD, and today the credit card spends are much more. And government wants to come out of all these exemptions, deductions, and all these things and get into a straightaway mode. So last year, totally about 6.5 lakhs taxpayers are there. And if you see, almost 30 to 40% of the returns were filed by the employee itself who were filing the returns. So today you go to filing an income tax, go to the portal, already the data is popped up there. So they don't require services of a chartered accountant or a tax practitioner to file the return. So they want to phase out the stage of these deductions, reduce the tax rates. Now the slabs have come down from 6 to 5, and over a period of time, maybe 5 to 4 or 3. And you will not get any deductions, and it will be a plain, simple filing of return. That's it.
I will follow up on this question. You said that there will be no deductions, right? And yes, while that is good because they don't have to worry about the deductions, there is also a possibility that because of the new regime, people are not going to invest in, say, NPS schemes, say PPF schemes, which have a big lock-in period, right? Like NPS has a lock-in period of 15 years. And then people will take a very laid-back approach and they won't invest in savings. They might not even buy health insurance, life insurance, which is required for hospitalizations. So won't that lead to a bad situation down the line?
See, today's youth knows where he wants to invest. So if you see during the COVID times, you have seen the stock market, how many demat accounts were opened during the COVID times. So then they are all well informed. So the old schemes of investment in NSC, your LIC, all these things are slowly going out. And there are a lot of private players coming into the market like Bajaj and all those things who are aggressively selling the product, telling that you get so much of returns, you have to invest so much of money. So they are well informed, and I know that they can take better decisions.
Okay, now we can open the question and answer session to the audience. Would there anybody who would like to ask questions to the panel members? You have Finitiative Club members standing around you, so who have the mic, you can approach them.
I have a question regarding the ONDC. Do you think that the big players or the big guns will end up quitting Indian market if they have to collaborate with ONDC, or does it completely depend on the agreement between the government and these players?
You believe in law of science, Darwin's theory of motion, survival of the fittest, right? So you know how the smaller hospitals have been taken over by the bigger ones. Your local gully kiranas have been taken over by the supermarkets. Just watch. Just watch. Keep watching. Amazon is quite old. They're already on the books of Reliance today. And Reliance is, you know, nothing but the capitalist economy. So sooner or later, it's a question of time. It's just around the corner. So today, everyone wants something new. And definitely, the ONDC is a bigger platform. And the last mile connectivity with ONDC platforms is much effective when compared to Amazon. I find it very difficult to sell on an Amazon platform today, to register on an Amazon platform, than it makes my life easy to register on government e-marketplaces. GEM portal. You might have heard about GEM portal, right? So they're nothing but, it's a primitive stage of the ONDC. So looking at India, ONDC is going to penetrate into the rural market. And there's a concept called ODOP, that is something strategically positioned. Roughly about 6,000 products have been identified in MSME. How many can you find on Amazon? Is there a category for MSME in Amazon? So where are the 6,000 products gone? So look at these as one of the new initiatives and the future markets. So maybe I cannot time it, but it is again the big guns who are already looking at a big opportunity behind this. So gone are the days. It is going to be an ONDC platforms, where obviously collaboration of Amazon can also happen. Reliance or any XYZ can take over Amazons and the Snap and the Flipkarts of the world. Mergers and acquisitions.
Thank you, sir.
Anybody else with questions?
Well, let me thank the three speakers for accepting our invitation from JAIM, and we are very grateful to be part of the whole discussion, especially the one which Jiko Dasgupta. I have certain questions to ask him directly. Like if you come to the FRBM, you talked about the fiscal deficit, you talk about the revenue deficit. I would have been happy to touch one more point called the primary deficit, right? Minus the interest component, things are looking very rosy. But if you take the interest component as part of the revenue expenditure, things are getting more complicated so far as this budget is, outcome of the budget is concerned. Don't you think that the rising interest will be a big concern with the increased level of capital expenses? If that be so, then how come this FRBM is going to be the real compliance in the years to come?
Yes, thanks, Professor Patnaik. That's a very interesting question. So I think there are two issues at hand. First, of course, whether one is being able to meet the deficit target. It also depends on the interest payment GDP ratio, and whether one is being able to meet the debt target. It also depends on the primary deficits and the gap between the output growth rate and interest rates. So any rise in the interest rates is going to make the objective of meeting fiscal rules much more difficult because it is increasing not only the interest payment GDP ratio, but it also can increase the debt GDP ratio itself. This is the typical Domer-Passaniti kind of conditions, where at any given primary deficit, if the interest rate is higher as compared to the growth rate, then the debt scenario can worsen a bit. But I think there are two issues at hand. The second issue is the following, which is perhaps sometimes missed in this entire debate of debt stability and FRBM Act, is that the output growth rate also responds to the expenditure component. The fact that the GDP growth rate is affected by the capital expenditures, it might mean that it would have implications for the fiscal deficit GDP ratio. In that ratio, the denominator would also change. If it is the case that the stimulus provided by this budget is not sufficient enough, then not only one has adverse impact from interest rate, but also from the denominator, that is the GDP growth rate going down. Had it been the case that we did not have the dilemma of which target to go by, remember that Timbergen dilemma that we were talking about, 2 targets and 1 instrument, which is the deficit that it has to abide by both. If the expenditures could have increased further, then it would have also perhaps beneficial to increase growth, reduce debt GDP ratio, and meet perhaps deficit target at greater ease. Thanks.
So just a supplementary for Mr. Praveen. Now this capex growth is happening because of the public investment from the government. The initiative is taken from the government end. And this has been happening for the past 3 years or so, more than that, I guess. But this year, this is one of the highest, 33%. But this is done with one intention from the government, and that more of private investment will come. But that thing is missing in the economy for past 3 years, even after COVID, before COVID, and after COVID. Nothing is happening, right? So what is the reason? I would like to know from you why this private crowding is not happening, even while the investment atmosphere in the country is getting better and better day by day.
Yeah, of course, this was a missing point. It was back of my mind. See, the whole idea I gave you the background of the budget. It is well placed and strategically planned. India towards 5 trillion economy. That target is set. That target is absolutely set. Come what may ever, we need to be on the speed mode. We need to achieve this target. It was carefully analyzed, I guess, because today one of the highest attracting investment point is infrastructure. Earlier, last year, it was 7 lakh crores. This year, it is called in for 13.7, including the housing to some part also. There is an opportunity for the foreign direct investments. The move itself calling for foreign direct investments. Once you know there is an FDI coming into the picture, the way economy runs. So in my view, it is not only the size of the private investment, but also looking at the foreign direct investors. This is a chance where India has opened up its economy to the world for foreign direct investments, inviting in the infrastructure today. And there is also a lot of technology behind the infrastructure. Example, if you look at the speed in which the highways are getting constructed, you don't see any indigenous machines there. You only see some imported machines, imported technologies. Sooner or later, it will happen in India. But that's the way, the speed, that's the rhythm of the day. Such kind of speed can happen only through FDIs right now. Maybe 10 years down the line, we may be the superpower. That is what is planned by 2030. So it is the foreign direct investment, which is a key aspect, which is going to help us push through the infrastructure.
This is a last question for you. how far is your perception that that credit guarantee scheme is helping the MSME, knowing very well that it's not going, no, it's not doing any good for the manufacturing growth for the country so far. Now the government has given one more year of extension in this budget. How far is going to help the MSME sectors?
Okay, now that's something which I would like to share. We are on the SLIC board. SLIC is, I think, sir should be knowing, we are on the Reserve Bank of India board, which meets every month. And we have the data and figures in place. CGTMSE is so far India's most successful scheme for the simple fact, and of course, after Pradhan Mantri Mudra Yojana. PM Mudra Yojana is the first highest successful Yojana, followed by Credit Guarantee Scheme. CGTMSE scheme is basically given for those businessmen, could be even startup as well as the existing business people who don't want to give collateral, who don't have a collateral, but they want to do some business. So there is this scheme which is available with the due diligence. Out of 10, 7 of them have come under CGTMSE in micro and small industries. But unfortunately, I would like to share one more fact. 92% of the MSMEs are still not financed through proper channels. Example, they don't go to the nationalized banks for loans, even to this day. They depend on the equity, they depend on other things, and they remain small in their thinking. I'm myself one of the beneficiaries of CGTMSE. So 92% of the market is still not on the network of nationalized banks. So whoever is on the network, 7%, out of 7 out of 10 are on the CGTMSE scheme. So definitely it is a beneficial scheme. You can please have a look at the SLIC report, which is a governing report which comes out of RBI month on month. In fact, yesterday we had one SLIC meeting. Sunday, being a Sunday also, we had a SLIC meeting, emergency meeting. So it is evident that 73% of CGTMSE loans has been given. CGTMSE loans for some reason had got struck because they didn't have the corpus budget. Last year it was 7,000 crores, now it is 9,000 crores. So they opened up from 1st April. So I'm sure, Professor, you will not have any regret. Please do approach. Any difficulties, please come to CASIA. We are here. We are the voice of MSME. We can help you.
Now, in a slight modulation of procedure, can I ask a question of Mr. Patnaik? Could you tell us about your view on the enormous outlay given to the railways over, I think, over 2.5 lakh crore of rupees? What do you think would be the impact on economic growth and employment generation in the short and medium term?
It's a very good question, sir. And a couple of days back, I was there in Kochi to attend such a post-budget analysis session. And this specific question asked to me, and I had an answer for that, because having worked with the railways for nearly 2.5 decades, I have seen the finance of railway crumbling down. Now, the very good thing which has happened to the Indian Railways is that when the budget was merged with the general budget in the year 2016, since then, the railways is on the upward move, even though the operating ratio is not that encouraging because of COVID and other structural reforms which are taking a lot of capex which are going. I know that the return on capital for railway investment takes a long time to come. And most of the old projects which has happened in the past, they are not giving return to the extent it was forecasted. Having said that, after 2016, things have really changed. A lot of modernization is happening on the track, railway electrification, new lines, new trains. The Vande Mataram Express is a real good contribution to show that the railway is moving forward. Now, this particular investment of 2.4 lakh crore in this budget is something out of the blue. Nobody had imagined that railway will get such a budget. Railway has never got such budget. If you compare the budget of 2013-14, it was 1/9 of the budget which you are getting. That's the reason why railway is to go for a lot of market borrowing all through. They were only earlier going for the market borrowing for the rolling stock. And 2013 onwards, when the situation went from bad to worse, they had gone for even the project investment. And this project investment, as you know, the railway projects are not done, the evaluation is not done realistically, and most of the return is not expected. So, railway, in fact, was going to a debt trap. Having worked in the Railway Finance Corporation, I know the piquant condition of the Indian Railways, where even though they were paying back the interest amount year in and year out because of the sovereign factor, but they were really in finance crunch. So the government supporting the infrastructure budget, and that to the railways in such a big way, is something which has to be cheered up. And as all of the speakers have said, including you, sir, the infrastructure has got a multiplier effect. As I know, railway has got a multiplier effect of 4 to 5 times. Now this investment which are coming, and you can see the effect coming after 10 years, and I think we'll be matching, as an emerging economy, we'll be matching into the best economy of the world so far as the infrastructure is concerned, and particularly road is going in the upward move, and railway will catch up very soon, like aviation. Thank you.
Thank you so much for such a wonderful Q&A session. Now, I would like to request Professor C.P. Ravindranathan, sir, to distribute the mementos to our esteemed guests. So the first on the panel, we had Assistant Professor Dr. Ziko Das Gupta. Second on the panel, we had Mr. Praveen B. And third on the panel, we had CA Sanjay Singhal. Now, I would like to request Sharmila to propose the vote of thanks.
Thank you, Samarth. Wow, indeed an engaging and eye-opening session with different perspectives and opinions on Union Budget 2023 to 24. I'm sure this is really gonna be useful to all of us. I deem it an honor and privilege to propose this vote of thanks on behalf of the college and the management group here. I know I stand between you and tea, but it would not be fair if I let you go before thanking everyone for making this event a success. Firstly, I would specially like to thank our honorable speakers who have come across from different places to address this session. Our heartfelt thanks goes out to Dr. Ziko Das Gupta for gracing us with his presence and giving us an insight on the macroeconomic component of this union budget. I must mention our sense of gratitude to our honorable speaker, Mr. Praveen B., for accepting this invitation and sharing with us his perspective on what this budget means for in this Amrit Kal, specifically focusing the MSME sector. Also, thank you so much, sir, for providing us the importance of the concept of ODOP scheme and ONDC network. I would also like to thank CA Sanjay Singhal for sparing your precious time and giving us an overview on finance and taxation aspect of this budget. This event would not have been possible without the constant encouragement of founder of Zyme Society and chairman of Zyme Bangalore, Professor J. Philip, who has always strived to provide us, his students, with multiple opportunities to interact with industry stalwarts and business leaders. Sir, we are always indebted to you for that. We thank Chairman, Zaim Kochi, and Ambassador CP Ravindranathan for always encouraging us and keeping the students abreast with current affairs. I extend my heartfelt gratitude to the President of Zyme Society, Mr. Anil J. Philip, for constantly motivating us and empowering us to push boundaries. We thank Director, Zyme Bangalore, Reverend Father Roy Abraham, for being a strong pillar of support to us. We would also like to thank our Dean, Professor Madhu Kumar, for not just being a guide to us, but always believing in us and helping us realize our potential. Special mention to our professor, Dr. Santosh Kumar Patnaik, sir, for leading this session. Thank you so much, sir, for your time, patience, support, and of course, constant guidance. I can't thank enough two of our student coordinators, Sharon Anusha Andrew of Batch 27 and Priyam Banerjee of Batch 28, for being exceptional moderators and keeping the session interactive. I thank the organizing committee for their efforts and hard work for making this event happen. Last but not the least, how can I not thank our audience for being with us patiently? You have been great. Thank you once again, everyone, and have a good evening ahead.